The garden looked greener than ever, and I hadn't watered it in 47 days. At first glance, it doesn't make sense. Leaves full, soil dark, tomatoes swelling like nothing's wrong. But if you've ever tried skipping even a week of watering, you already know this should have collapsed. So what actually happened here, because this wasn't luck, it was a system. And the strange part, once you see it, you can't unsee it. It started with frustration. Every summer, same cycle, you water more. And somehow the plants need even more. Miss a day, things droop, miss two, damage. It felt like the garden was addicted, and that's exactly the problem. Plants weren't weak, I made them weak. Think about it when you water daily, where do roots stay? Near the surface. Why would a plant dig deeper if water is always handed to it? So I accidentally trained my garden to become dependent. Shallow roots, high stress, constant watering. But here, where it gets interesting. What if the goal isn't to give plants more water, but to make them need less? The shift didn't start with stopping water. That would have killed everything. It started with the soil, because soil isn't just dirt, it's a storage system. And mine, it was terrible at holding anything. Water went in and disappeared, so the real question was, how do I water less? It was, why does the soil lose water so fast? And that changes everything. I began by covering the ground, not plastic. Fancy materials, just organic mulch, dry leaves, straw, even shredded cardboard. At first it looked messy, but something subtle started happening. The soil underneath stayed cool, not wet, not dry, just stable, and stability is what plants actually need. But here's the part most people miss. Mulch doesn't just protect water, it changes the entire behavior of the soil. Without cover, sunlight hits the ground directly, heat builds, moisture evaporates fast, but once covered. Evaporation drops massively, not a little, a lot, and suddenly water doesn't disappear overnight. But that's not the full story. Something else was happening beneath the surface. When soil stays consistently moist, not soaked, just balanced, it becomes alive. Microbes wake up, worms return. Organic matter starts breaking down, and this creates something powerful, structure. So instead of loose, dusty soil, you get sponge-like soil. It holds water, it distributes water. It keeps roots comfortable, and now the plants don't panic. But here, where I almost messed it up, because even after fixing the soil, I kept watering the same way, and that ruined the effect. Frequent light watering kept roots shallow again, so I had to change something uncomfortable. I had to water less but deeper. Instead of daily watering, I watered heavily, then stopped. At first, plants reacted. Leaves drooped slightly. Growth slowed. It felt like I was doing damage. But this is where most people quit. And that's exactly why this method isn't common. Because there's a transition phase and it looks like failure. But it's not, it's adaptation. Plants started searching. Roots began moving downward, looking for moisture instead of waiting for it, and deeper soil always holds more water. So once roots reached that zone, something flipped. The plants stabilized, then they strengthened, then they exploded. And suddenly, I wasn't watering for survival anymore. I was watering for support. Big difference. But there's another layer most people ignore. Shade, not from trees but from the plants themselves. As the garden grew thicker, leaves began covering the soil naturally. This reduced heat even more. Less heat, right arrow, less evaporation, right arrow, less watering needed. So the system started reinforcing itself, and that's when things got weird. I skipped watering for 3 days, then 5, then 10, and nothing collapsed. In fact, the garden looked better than before. Healthier leaves, stronger stems, fewer pests, which raises a serious question. Why does less water sometimes create better plants? Because stress-controlled stress makes systems stronger. Too much comfort creates weakness. Too much stress creates damage, but the middle zone, that creates resilience. And most modern gardening completely ignores that balance. But don't misunderstand this. This isn't no water gardening. That's unrealistic. This is intelligent water reduction. And there's a difference, because I still watered, just differently, less frequently, more intentionally, always deeply, and always with the soil protected. Remove any one of those and the system breaks. Now let's get practical. If you tried this today without understanding the sequence, you'd probably fail. So here's what actually matters. First, cover your soil. Without this, everything else is useless. Bare soil is your biggest enemy. Second, improve water retention. Add compost, organic matter, anything that helps soil hold moisture. If water disappears quickly, your system is broken. Fix that first. Third, change how you water. Stop frequent shallow watering. Instead, water deeply, then wait. Let the soil dry slightly on top, but not completely below. This encourages root growth. Fourth, be patient. The transition phase will look wrong. Plants may struggle briefly. But that struggle is the shift from dependency to resilience. Quit too early and you never see results. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people fail not because the method doesn't work, but because they don't tolerate the transition. They want instant results, but this system rewards patience, not control. There's also a bigger reason this isn't widely talked about. It doesn't sell well. Think about it. If your garden needs less water, you buy fewer products. Fewer irrigation systems, fewer tools, less dependency. So naturally, the dominant advice leans toward more inputs, not less. Not a conspiracy, just economics, but once you step outside that system, you start noticing something else. Nature already does this. Forests aren't watered daily. Wild plants don't rely on humans. They survive because the system supports them. So maybe the real goal isn't to manage plants, but to design systems that manage themselves. And that's exactly what this became. Not a garden I constantly maintain, but a system that holds itself together. Now let's talk results. Before daily watering, constant stress, inconsistent growth. After minimal watering, stable soil, stronger plants. But the biggest change wasn't visible, it was behavioral. I stopped reacting and started designing. Because once you understand this, watering stops being a chore and starts becoming a strategy. So here's the real takeaway. The goal isn't to stop watering completely. That's the wrong question. The real question is, how do you make water stay instead of constantly replacing it? Answer that and everything changes, and maybe that's why this works. Not because it's new, but because it goes against how we've been taught to think. So now think about your own setup. Are you feeding a system or supporting one? Because those are not the same thing. And once you see the difference, you'll start noticing something strange in your own garden too. Not what's dying, but what was never actually strong to begin with. The strange part is, once you stop watering all the time, you start noticing things you were blind to before. Small things, like how quickly bare soil turns hard under the sun. Or how water, when poured on dry ground, doesn't sink, it runs. That should bother you, because if water isn't going into the soil, where exactly do you think your plants are drinking from? This is where most gardens silently fail. Not because there isn't enough water, but because the water never actually reaches where it matters. And that flips the entire problem. It's not about supply, it's about absorption. So I ran a simple test, 2 patches of soil, one bare, one covered with mulch. Same water, same time, the bare soil, water pooled then vanished within hours, by the next day dry again. The mulch soil, water disappeared slower, but the ground underneath stayed cool and damp for days. Days, that gap right there, that's the difference between dependency and stability. But here, where it gets more interesting, the mulch soil didn't just hold water. It changed how water moved. Instead of evaporating upward, it spread sideways, deeper, wider. Suddenly, one watering reached more roots, which means fewer waterings did more work. And this is the part nobody tells you. Efficiency matters more than quantity. You don't need more water, you need less waste, but there was still a problem. Even with mulch, the top layer would eventually dry out, and visually it looked bad. Dry soil equals panic, so the instinct is to water again. And that instinct, it ruins everything, because the top layer drying is not failure, it's a signal. A signal that the surface is protecting what's happening below, and if you keep interrupting that cycle, roots never go deeper. So I forced myself to wait, not blindly but intentionally. I stopped reacting to how the surface looked and started paying attention to what the plants were telling me. Leaves, color, growth, and here's the twist, plants don't care if the top inch is dry, they care about what's happening deeper. This is where most people misread their garden. They water based on appearance, not function, and that's a mistake. But let's go deeper, because even if you fix mulch and watering, there's still something working against you. Heat. Sunlight isn't the problem, excess heat is. When soil temperature rises too high, water evaporates faster and roots get stressed. So even if you water correctly, heat cancels it out, and that's why 2 identical gardens can behave completely differently. Same water, different temperature, different results. So I started observing shade patterns, not just where the sun hits, but how long it stays. Some areas stayed cooler longer, and guess what? Those areas needed less water, but I didn't want to rely on chance, so I adjusted spacing. Let plants grow closer, let leaves overlap, let the garden create its own shade. At first it felt wrong. We're taught to give plants space, but too much space exposes soil, and exposed soil loses water, so I tightened the system. And something unexpected happened. Moisture retention improved again, not slightly, noticeably. Now the system had layers, mulch protecting the soil, dense plants protecting the mulch, deep roots accessing stored water, each layer reinforcing the other. And this is where it stops being gardening and starts becoming design. But let's address the obvious question. What about extreme heat? What about peak summer? Does this still work? Here's the honest answer. It depends on how well you built the system. Because this method doesn't eliminate water, it stretches it. If your soil is weak, it will fail. If your roots are shallow, it will fail. If your mulch is thin, it will fail. And that's the part people don't want to hear. There's no shortcut here. You can't skip the foundation and expect the result. But if you build it right, something very different happens. You stop fighting the environment and start working with it. During the hottest days, I still watered. But not daily, not even every few days. Sometimes once a week, sometimes less, and instead of panic, there was control. But here, where things get uncomfortable again, because success creates a new problem. Growth, plants started growing faster, healthier, denser, and that increased demand. So even though the system was efficient, it was also more active. More life equals more water usage. So now the question changed again. Not how do I reduce water, but how do I balance growth and sustainability? Because you can push growth or you can stabilize it, but doing both blindly creates conflict. So I made a decision. I stopped chasing maximum yield and started prioritizing consistency. That changed everything. Instead of forcing plants to grow as fast as possible, I let them grow at a pace the system could support, and suddenly less stress, less intervention, more reliability. This is where most people get it wrong. They try to maximize output without stabilizing the system first, and then they blame water, but water isn't the problem. Mismanagement is. Now let's talk about the before and after, because this is where the difference becomes obvious. Before daily watering, dry, cracked soil within hours, plants dependent, sensitive, inconsistent after minimal watering. Soil stays cool, soft, alive, plants resilient, stable, predictable, but the biggest difference. Time before the garden demanded attention. After it required observation, and those are not the same thing. Observation creates control, reaction creates chaos, and that's the real shift here. Not less work, but smarter work. But here's one more layer most people ignore. Rain, because once your system improves, rain stops being random help and becomes stored resource. In the old setup, rain came and went. Soil couldn't hold it, so it disappeared, wasted. In the new system, rain gets captured, held, used over time. And suddenly one rainfall replaces multiple waterings. That's when you realize something important. You're not just reducing watering, you're increasing storage, and storage is power. So now step back and look at the full picture. This was never about stopping water. That idea is misleading. This was about reducing loss, improving storage, encouraging depth, creating balance, and once all of that aligns, watering becomes secondary. So if you're still watering every day, ask yourself something uncomfortable. Is your garden actually thirsty or just poorly designed? Because those two things look identical, but require completely different solutions. And once you understand that difference, you stop asking, how much should I water? And start asking, why does my system lose water so fast? Answer that honestly and you'll unlock something most gardeners never do: control. And here's the final twist. This doesn't just apply to gardens. Any system that constantly needs input is usually inefficient. So the real lesson isn't just about water, it's about dependency. And once you start seeing that pattern, you'll begin questioning more than just how you grow plants. So now the question is, what in your system looks healthy, but is secretly dependent? Because fixing that is where the real transformation begins. So after all of this, let's strip it down to the truth. I didn't stop watering my garden, I removed the need to constantly rescue it. And those are completely different things. Because in the beginning, water felt like control. If something looked off, I watered. If something slowed down, I watered. If something felt uncertain, I watered. It wasn't strategy, it was reaction. But once the system changed, that control disappeared. And strangely, that's when real control showed up. The soil held water instead of losing it. The roots searched instead of waiting. The plants adapted instead of depending. And suddenly the garden didn't collapse without me. It continued. That's the part most people don't expect. You don't feel powerful when you build a self-sustaining system. You feel unnecessary, and that can be uncomfortable. Because we're used to being needed, used to constant input, used to thinking effort equals results. But here's the reality most people avoid. If something needs you all the time, it's not strong, it's dependent. And this garden proved that clearly. The biggest change wasn't less watering, it was a complete shift in thinking. From how do I give more, to how do I make this require less? That single shift is where everything started working. Because once you focus on reducing dependency, you naturally build resilience. And resilience always beats effort in the long run. So no, this isn't a trick, it's not a hack, and it's definitely not instant. It's slower at the start, uncomfortable in the middle, and almost boring at the end, but boring is stable, and stable is powerful. So if you take anything from this, don't copy the surface. Don't just add mulch and expect magic. Don't skip steps and hope for results. Understand the principle. build the system, let it adapt, and then step back. Because the real goal isn't to grow a garden that needs you every day, it's to grow one that keeps going even when you're not there. And once you see that working in front of you, it raises a much bigger question. Where else in your life are you constantly watering something that was never designed to survive on its own? Fix that, and you're not just improving a garden, you're redesigning the way you build everything.